Okay. Our next speaker is Rachel Harris, PhD. Psychologist Rachel Harris. Oh, her talk, name of her talk is Listening to Ayahuasca, so you better listen to her. Rachel Harris is the author of Listening to Ayahuasca, New Hope for Depression, Addiction, PTSD, and Anxiety. She was in private practice for 35 years working with people interested in psychospiritual development. During a decade working in research, Rachel received a National Institutes of Health New Investigators Award and published more than 40 scientific studies in peer-reviewed journals. She was also in the 1968 Esalen residential program, Big Sur, California. So let's give Rachel a hand and welcome her. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Whoops, I have water.
Oh, there's water there too.
Oh, okay, great. Hi, well, thank you to all for spending the whole day together and with us, and thank you to the Portland Psychedelic Society. So, I'm going to talk as a researcher and as a therapist, and here's how my life is divided. 10 years in a grant writing research office and 35 years in private practice. So you're going to hear from both sides. So while I was writing, listening to ayahuasca, I was very inspired by a painting I had bought years ago. And this is sort of like an iconic painting in that the energy of the medicine is actually in the painting. And Amaringo talked about his work this way, that if you spend time with it, you begin to enter into that medicine state. So it's similar to the Greek Orthodox icons where the divinity is in the artwork. The same thing is true for me with this Aboriginal artwork. And I'm not sure you can see that from the back. It's the Pleiades, it's the seven sisters being chased by, I think, the middle star in Orion's belt across the sky. And for me, there's a similarity that both these paintings, totally different cultures, but they capture another world. So they capture and they convey, they carry to us another world. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit, both from a research point of view, if that's possible, but certainly from a therapeutic point of view. So here's the best statement I know about after the ceremony, and that's been my main interest as a therapist and as a researcher. What happens after the ceremony? And this is from a Navajo peyote ceremony or a vision quest. For 4 days after the conclusion of the ceremony, the patient is considered by family and friends as if he or she is a holy person and given an opportunity to focus, evaluate, interpret, and experience a new self, and a new self is the key. So I've had a lot of interest, and this is an eagle from the island where I live. So I've had a lot of interest in this concept of a new self, in this transformation that happens. And I can tell you about one of my consultations that was a failure. And this was an 82-year-old Harvard-trained psychiatrist, as if that makes a difference. And he talked to me about, he wanted to do an ayahuasca ceremony, and he was concerned about what it would be like, and the whole bit. And what I said to him was, be very careful that after the weekend, you don't go right back into the office, and you schedule yourself a few days just to have time for yourself. So what did he do? Any good medical doctor, would he listen to a psychologist? Monday morning, he's right back with 8 patients scheduled that day. And his report was, I don't think it made any difference, the ceremony. So he went right back into his old life, into his old box, his old way of functioning. And that's the opposite of integration, basically. And so I'll talk about integration woven through the talk. But I love this concept of the community greeting a new self, supporting that this is now a new iteration of this person. So when I did a basic survey study of people using ayahuasca in North America, and that was my only criteria, and 81 subjects, and this is sort of a summary, a theme of the kinds of things that they reported that we would look for as a psychotherapist in the office. This is what we would see as progress and moving toward successful psychotherapy series. And there's greater self-acceptance and self-compassion, less depression and anxiety, less mood problems, and improved significant relationships in life. And this is exactly what we would hope for with a psychotherapy client, and this is what people reported. Now, there are no controls in this study. I mean, people were in one ceremony and 200 ceremonies. They took a small amount. They took 3 cups. I mean, it was just all over the place. But it was the beginning report of saying, so it was published in 2012, gives you a sense of how long ago, what's happening? How is this medicine being used in North America? But this is the quote that I'm really interested in from Hoffman, where he talks about, and this is again after the ceremony, the psychedelic experience, is that the experience can serve as a starting point for restructuring the personality. So, yes, there are spontaneous changes that happen as a result of the psychedelic experience. And they can be used as a starting point from a therapeutic perspective to really restructure the personality. And I want to just digress for a minute. When I retired my private practice and I moved from Princeton, New Jersey, I moved out of a 4-bedroom house into a little cabin on an island in Maine. And so I had to throw away a lot of stuff. And of all the things I gave away and threw away, I threw away old patients' drawings. And I would ask them I was doing decades of workshops, mostly at Esalen and Omega Institutes in New York. And I would do a long exercise, and then part of it would be, can you do a non-representational drawing of the way your psyche is structured, of your psychic architecture? And one of the drawings that I threw away was by an architect who was building houses, and I'm so sorry I threw it away. And it was his own personal, convoluted, structure of his psychic architecture. Because he had the training as an architect, he did a beautiful drawing. But we all have our own developed architecture. And just to translate it into a somatic experiences, there was a recent article in the New York Times that they're doing research just looking at the profile of the way people move, just the way people walk. And evidently we all have our own, you think, well, we all just walk, but we know we can recognize each other by our different walks. And so we each have a profile of how we move. And it develops spontaneously. So where does the architecture come from? Where does our style of movement come from? Well, it's the way we learn to survive in the first couple of years. And so I'm going to talk more about those early years as a therapist. When we talk about restructuring a personality, it's beginning to look at the way we organized ourselves to learn how to survive in the family, the situation we were born into. And so some of that, for some of us, is traumatic, and for some of us it isn't. And that's not exactly relevant from this perspective. This is something we all do in the first couple of years of life. And it also includes some of what we pick up from transgenerational transference of trauma and ways of being, some of the way we learn how to be from our parents very early on. And it's Alan Shore, for those therapists in the room, if you Google Alan Shore, Schore, you'll find he's done a lot of neurological psychiatry writing in this area of how the implication of transmission from the parent's neurological style to the child's through eye contact. And you see how important eye contact was earlier when the baby looks at the mother just at birth. It happens immediately, and so you think of all the times there's eye contact, and there's a real connection between the brains. And it's through that process in the first 2 to 3 years of life that our brains are growing the most from our whole lives, and we learn how to survive. And we get sort of like an imprint in our psychic structure and evidently in our way of moving as well. So when we talk about one of the opportunities that a psychedelic experience opens up is this opportunity to reset that early programming. And these are all the words that get used. Recalibrate gets used a lot on the East Coast. I don't know if that's a term that's used here. But it's a way to, these are kind of colloquial terms that are used to describe that restructuring of the personality. So you get a sense that we've identified this, we've experienced it, we know this happens. And this is part of the opportunity after a ceremony. And what this psychiatrist missed by boxing himself right into his everyday life without giving himself even a chance to breathe and possibly explore. And, this is going to come up again, that, all the data is showing that the mystical experience, the more complete the experience, the more positive the outcome. I mean, this is the critical variable. I don't think there's any data that questions this. But how does it work? Why does it lead to such amazing improvement? I mean, the data is remarkable. How does this restructuring happen? We don't have an answer to that, but it's really a valuable question, because then it leads to, well, how does the restructuring happen spontaneously, and how can we maximize it and facilitate that process? And so that's the therapeutic question from the perspective of working with these psychedelic experiences over time beyond the medical protocols. So, part of the theory, and this is coming from Imperial College, from Robin Carhart Harris's work, it's the lowering of the activity in the default mode network. And so that's been mentioned already, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but it's the mind-wandering function of the default mode network. And it's going on most of the time. I think some studies talk about that we're in default mode 60% of the time, so it's even more. And it's generally true that this is the title of a paper, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind, is that, we're reviewing regrets in our lives, we're worrying, so we're in the past, we're worrying about the future. It's the opposite of being in the moment, being in the present, wholly present right now. It's the opposite of that. So it's all the things we are concerned about outside of here and now. And it's usually got a negative tint to it. So a wandering mind is in a happy mind. It's Daniel something, and he's the one who's done Harvard psychologist who's done a lot of work on happiness. And a high active default mode network does not make us happy, just to sum that one up. And so what the psychedelic experience does is it quiets that network. This is a part of the brain that's not geographically located. It's a network throughout the brain. And so here's the whole story. Yeah, I mean, that says it all. And of course, we do it to ourselves, basically. So Carhart Harris talks about this as these are the neural correlates of ego integrity. I mean, he's basically saying this is the neurological structure that is the ego or supports the ego. And then he goes on to say psychedelics work by dismantling these patterns of negative thought and breaking down the neurological connections upon which they rest. Breaking down is not the right word, but quieting, I would say. And so it opens up the opportunity for new connections to be made, different connections, and another opportunity I'll talk about in a few minutes. But it is the opportunity for new connections to be made, either rewiring of what we've got or actual neurogenesis, new brain cells and new connections. So again, here's another way of talking about the repatterning, the restructuring of a personality. And so this is, I forget where I got this, but this happens to be a professional musician, a classical musician who left that business and is working in a nonprofit, I think in Los Angeles. But this is his personal statement of his own experience. As a kid, you come to all those conclusions that aren't necessarily right, but they help you survive in the moment. And then you spend, as far as I can tell, the rest of your life unpacking those poor coping mechanisms to see where they do and don't serve you. That's the process of restructuring. Okay? And is that different from a therapeutic process? A chance to take a look at this is how I've organized myself, these are my belief systems. Are they working for me? Are they not working for me? And so the key in that process, whether it's in what he describes, this guy did not necessarily have any psychedelic experience. This was his own realization. Is there's a disidentification with my old way of protecting myself, of survival, my way of originally constructing myself. I can begin to have a little space between me and the ego that I've constructed. And so this concept of disidentification, here's how it's reported by subjects in my study. I've always struggled with anxiety and depression, but I'm more accepting of them now. That's a fabulous statement, and you can get a sense of the distance. I'm not totally consumed by the depression and anxiety. I'm able to have a little distance so I can accept them. And that's what's worked on in therapy is sort of a compassionate acceptance, a compassionate self-acceptance. And I want to contrast, I'll say that in a minute. I don't take my moods so seriously anymore. Again, you see this sense of a little space there of being able to reflect and not be totally identified. I still have ups and downs, but I'm less surprised. Again, that same space. I can see this and I'm not caught in it exactly. And so I just want to differentiate. There are some people, and I've interviewed them, I've had them come up to me at conferences where they say, I had one ayahuasca experience, when I went into it, I was very depressed, I was distraught, I was beside myself, I had this intense experience, and I have not been depressed. And I say, how long ago was it? And they say, 6 months, 2 years. There are miracle cures that we can't really explain. And that'll come up again where there's something like that. A therapist has to just keep their mouth shut. Don't mess with it. There are miracle cures. We don't understand them. Hallelujah is basically the response. But for many of us, it's a process, and it's a process of learning how to disidentify, to have that little bit of space, and maybe to not take our moods so seriously, that sense of developing that self-reflective awareness that gives us a neutrality so that we're not caught up in the sweep of emotions. And this is called a lot of different things in the psychological literature. And these are all different terms for that same little space between my sense of myself and the content of what I'm experiencing. And yeah, I'm not crazy about any of these names, and I guess there isn't a consensus in the psychological community, but there are different approaches to getting to this same capacity. It's an enlarging capacity of who we are, so that I am not just my moods. I am having my moods, but I am not my moods. I mean, that's literally psychosynthesis, if any of you remember that. This is where am I going? There we are. This is a bumper sticker. It's my favorite bumper sticker. And there it is, don't believe everything you think. So you can see that we're skirting on cognitive behavioral therapy, which is aimed at changing the thought patterns. I'm not a big proponent of this approach to therapy, mostly because I find it boring for the therapist, so I didn't do it. It's now, regarded as evidence-based therapy, but it captures a little bit of this distance, not as well as some other therapeutic approaches, but the bumper sticker really gets it. Mindfulness meditation also captures the same creation of this distance, this sort of, it's related to equanimity and allowing things to pass through you. Be the space, not the content. Again, it's the same theme that you're hearing here. And the research shows that mindfulness meditation reduces activity in the default mode network. There's a crossover place here. So let's talk about this. How did we get to this point today without anyone talking about the shadow? And these are the challenges. So this is a diagnosis from the DSM-5, depersonalization, derealization, where there's a strong sense of unreality, a hollowness, a flatness in the world, meaningless, hopeless, and high anxiety and panic. And I met someone at the MAPS conference a couple of years ago, and he started telling me about this, how this experience came up in an ayahuasca ceremony, and I didn't quite get it. And he was a very sophisticated meditator. He'd been trained in Southeast Asia and was an accomplished therapist and had just very refined capacity to self-observe. And they kept talking about getting into this no-exit kind of a space in the ayahuasca ceremony. And I think we had to have 3 different conversations before I began to get it, because I didn't know about this diagnosis. And so it's fascinating that that the meditation community is beginning to look at this diagnosis. And it's Shinzen Young, who's a really brilliant teacher, talks about the evil twin of enlightenment. Evidently, it's kind of right next door. You can get stuck in this no-exit consciousness, or you can be in this ecstatic sense of enlightenment. And the bad advice, if you're stuck in this no-exit thing, is to just push through it. And there's a deadness to it. And that's not, that's the typical advice, hang in there, it'll change spontaneously. No, it won't. You have to really shift. And this is a time to defocus and to sort of divert your attention and to focus especially on opening the heart and a heart-centered connection. It's also not a time to do another psychedelic experience. And lots of times I've heard, people will sign up for an ayahuasca weekend, Friday night, Saturday night. I've done it myself. It's no fun. And I'll probably do it again. And what I've heard people say is they get into a certain point Friday night and they're very, very uncomfortable, and the advice is, do the second night. They say, I want to go home, this is too much for me, or I'm not feeling good, I'm stuck. And the advice is, sit tonight. Stop. If you're in this dead-end place, do not do another trip. It is not going to help. Go back to the heart-centered connection that you don't need a psychedelic trip for. We all know lots of meditations we can do that open the heart. Don't do another psychedelic trip. And we have to begin to recognize when not to try and push through. Because there is sort of this more is better, higher dose is better, go for it. That's not always right. And it's hard to know when it is right and when it isn't. I'll give us all that. So the resources for this, I don't think this has gotten enough attention, even though it's been in the Atlantic magazine. But the person doing this work, and I would say Google her, is his name, Willoughby Britton. And she's at Brown, and so she's developed a whole model to begin to train meditation teachers that when their students get stuck in this very same no exit room where everything's dead and this sense of hopelessness and desolation, is that, again, not to sit more, not to hang in more, which, I've been in this situation since I can't even count anymore. It's, I guess, 40-some years. It's always just sit more hours. And that's the wrong way to go. And so the meditation teachers are being trained to recognize this and pull someone out. And, if you've been around meditation retreats long enough, you've heard lots of stories of people having psychotic breaks during meditation retreat. And so they're just beginning to train the teachers to recognize this. And the same is true in psychedelic circles. We have to watch for this. And if you go to Shinzen Young's website, I think he's got an article or two about it. His writing is brilliant. Okay, so I talked about what therapy did do well, that ayahuasca also does, handling moods, more self-acceptance, better interpersonal relationships. Hallelujah, that we feel like, oh, I've been a great therapist, this is successful. What we stink at is dealing with addictions, health behaviors. We can't get people to lose weight. That's why there's a whole separate business about that. And I've never seen someone have a cosmic shift of worldview in my therapy office. Hasn't happened. Even I haven't. So that doesn't, and this stuff happens all the time as a result of psychedelic experiences. So we don't touch this in psychotherapy. And that cosmic shift in worldview is once you drink, this is Jeremy Narby, so he's talking about ayahuasca. Once you drink and once you see, you can't unsee. We are changed. It's a transformation that is permanent, and when they do the studies following up 40 years later, we are still changed in an ineffable way. But it shifts our relationship to our own life and our own death. A friend of mine died a couple years ago, and when he was a deadhead. And so when he was sitting in the office, the story came back to the small community I live in, that when the doctor said, you have terminal cancer, you have maybe a year to live, he was 70 years old, he hadn't prepared anything, he wasn't expecting to get this. He said, I've had enough acid, I'm ready. And he was. He built a beautiful table that he had wanted to, he was a craftsman that he had wanted to build, and then he died. Okay, so this is my little advertisement for the culture. These are the best statistically significant polls about what's happening in the culture. And both the Gallup and the Pew Research found that almost half of people report having had a profound religious experience or awakening, a religious or mystical experiencing, that is, a moment of religious or spiritual. Almost half of us and this has gone up. I should probably do a chart with that shows, in 1960 it was 20% or something, and it's gone up every decade. More and more people were reporting this. So if almost half of us are having it, and it's 10 years later, it could be now up to 50%, and yet we still can't talk about it. So this is my little advertisement about it's okay to talk about it. And people have this is totally separate from psychedelics. People have spontaneous mystical experiences where that's an awakening that changes their lives. It doesn't even have to be a near-death experience, although that would count. But these things just happen. I mean, the nonfiction author Barbara Aaron, is anyone going to help me? Aaron Wright? So she's written a whole bunch of books on a wide range of topics, and she talks about her own experience. I think she's now in her late 60s, and the experience happened in her adolescence, where she's walking down the street and everything bursts into flame. Now, what could that be but a mystical experience? And she's talking about it in this book for the very first time. And there are lots of books that talk about this kind of spontaneous mystical experience, and it needs to be part of our just accepted reality that this happens. And what does that mean for you? How are you different? So these are the variables for complete mystical experience. Again, it comes from Walter Pahnke, and it's used at Hopkins. And here's a slightly different version from Carhart Harris's work, where he got to use the acronym DIED, which is clever, but it's sort of the same. I lost all sense of ego, dissolved away, identity dissolved away. You get a sense that he's hitting some of the same notes. And this is basically the critical variable for therapeutic gain after a psychedelic experience. But I keep asking these questions. So what is it about this complete mystical experience that leads to such positive therapeutic outcomes? How does it work? What are the mediating factors? And how can therapists maximize and support this process? We don't have answers to this. We don't know enough because the research protocols are not looking at this. In order to be cost effective, the psychedelic experience is surrounded by a pre and a post minimum amount of therapeutic support and intervention, because that's to control costs, you have to minimize that factor. But there will be many different styles of exploring the psychedelic world, as you all are finding and know about, whether it's in the underground or through research opportunities, or maybe someday legal opportunities. And there will be many different approaches to using these medicines. And as a therapist, I'm very interested in how therapists can best support these processes that happen spontaneously. Now, what's unusual about ayahuasca, and this could maybe, some people would say, well, this all applies to psilocybin mushrooms as well, is I asked, and let me tell you, I was not smart enough to ask this question in my questionnaire, but I interviewed a number of shaman, and this fabulously intuitive female shaman said, this is the question to ask. Do you have an ongoing relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca? Now, when I was doing that research, I was absolutely guided by, I literally heard a voice that was not my own voice, that was not an inner voice, it was an outer voice. So I was having my own relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca that I was not thinking about all that much. I obviously should have been, but I don't know, somehow I was just accepting it and going along and doing this 3-year study. You'd think in 3 years it would occur to me, what am I doing? And someone even asked me, are you working on your dissertation? And I said, no, I did that 30 years ago. It was kind of irrational. And then I get the data, and I'm going through the data, and almost 3/4 of the people said yes. And I had an ontological fit. I could not believe, somehow I thought I'm the only one who's hearing this voice. And 3/4 of the people have an ongoing relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca. And somebody should ask this question about people working directly with mushrooms, if they have a relationship. It's a personal relationship with the spirit, with the plant spirit. And there's now really interesting books being written. I think there are a couple of different books written by botanists who have gotten research instructions from ayahuasca on how to do research. And Monica Gagliano is one of the most recent ones. And I think the book is Thus Spoke the Plant. And it's remarkable. So this was the finding. And I was just sort of blown away with it. And so I asked the top religion professors who I was lucky enough to know. Robert Foreman is a specialist he's one of the leading scholars on mysticism. And I had breakfast with him on the East Coast one year and asked him, and his answer was, we don't know. Who am I hearing from? And he was just very blunt. And then I was working with Houston Smith and supporting him at Esalen for a workshop he was doing. He was 92 at the time or something and needed help. And so when I had breakfast with him, I asked him also the same question, and he gave me the exact same answer. It was as if they had coordinated, and I know they hadn't. We don't know. And somehow these religious scholars gave me permission to rest in the mystery. I still don't know. It still blows my mind. I can't explain it. But I know that this connection is therapeutically very important. Okay. Batteries? And one of the ways I understand the importance is in terms of attachment. Can everybody see the kitten? Yeah, I scanned through a lot of photos to capture attachment, and this one did it for me. So this is the introduction to talking about attachment in terms of the relationship. So attachment clinically, and this is again going back to the earliest years where the attachment category gets established by how we're treated by our parents. And half of us will fall into a secure attachment category. And these are the kinds of statements that we would make. I find it easy to get close to others. I'm comfortable depending on them and having them depend on me. I don't worry about being abandoned or about someone getting too close. This is secure attachment. I'm comfortable in this range, moving in and out. I trust. I can ask for help. I can allow myself to be vulnerable. 50% of us. 25% have an anxious attachment. I worry. I'm reluctant to get close. I don't know if my partner, I worry whether my partner loves me or will stay with me. I want to get close, but sometimes, I scare people away. And so you see there's a discomfort in this. There's sort of almost like there's a lot of anxiety around getting close. That's 25%. There's another 25% who are avoidant, who are I'm just flat out uncomfortable being close to others. I find it difficult to trust, to allow myself to depend on them. I'm nervous if they get too close. And others might want me to be more intimate than I feel comfortable being. So I'm leaving out the smaller percentage of a disorganized attachment category where there's been dramatic trauma. But I would just want to acknowledge so I know this added up to 100, but it's maybe each of these is 23.5 or something, and there's like 2% who are disorganized. where there's been abuse with the caretaking parent. So where this category has great implications in our capacity to form relationships, especially intimate love relationships, life partners. And so this is a British philosopher who talks specifically about this. This was a wildly popular New York Times opinion piece. And it's a great title. I mean, it's just a great title. What we're looking for is familiarity. Not consciously, but that's what feels like love. And which may well complicate any plans we might have had for happiness. This is evidently how British philosophers talk. Colossal bummer. I mean, if you want to ruin your life, this is the way to, and this is why we should all have good therapy before we decide to get married. Because we will choose, 50% of us will be more likely to make a good choice, because we'll replicate the secure experience we had with our original family, our family of origin. But the other 50% of us are going to choose someone who makes us feel insecure and anxious or avoidant. We're going to replicate what feels comfortable, what reinforces our psychic architecture, that the way we've designed ourselves and constructed ourselves fits with that person who's going to drive us crazy in exactly the same way we tried to protect ourselves from. Why you will marry the wrong person. I should have read this years ago. And so this is Lee Kirkpatrick is a psychology of religion professor who talks about how do you heal attachment category? How do you shift into a secure attachment category? And so therapy, this is why I say we should all have therapy before we choose. A good marriage, a long-term good marriage with someone who's secure, we can gain what's called an earned security. We can actually shift and heal our attachment category. Psychotherapy, also a healing relationship or a spiritual relationship. Now, he's not exactly talking about a spiritual relationship with a plant teacher, but he's talking about a spiritual relationship with God, an unseen being, which is what a plant teacher is. And so I can't tell you the number of people who have talked about, I can rely on grandmother ayahuasca, I can just take a minute and a deep breath and I can feel her with me. I know that she's always has good intentions for me and that she loves me. And I've had this cosmic experience of being loved in my relationship with grandmother ayahuasca, and I can connect to it at any time. So it's not like even calling a therapist and getting and answering, a message that you get a voicemail. Always available. It's not bad for healing an attachment category. And so so that's the shifting. And then this is Stan. Here's Stan's statement, who's, taken everything, Stan Groff, in which he's experienced a transpersonal therapist in the spirit of ayahuasca. So I'm not sure why I don't know why he doesn't say this about mushrooms, because I think some people would report the same thing. But this is a transpersonal therapist. This is the healing relationship that can heal attachment trauma. So this was from a psychotherapist who was working with ayahuasca in ceremonies. Each ceremony took off where the one before ended to integrate in an incredibly understanding and loving way the family history as it's being transformed into light. My whole life can now be seen from a new point of view. That I have now, my psyche is so restructured, the way I've organized myself is recalibrated, so now I can look at my history from a new point of view. So you get a sense of this is the reset. So as much as I'm a proponent of psychotherapy, I also want to say there are times not to seek therapy. And that's, again, when you see a miracle cure. I never drank alcohol again. I don't know if some of you have heard this from people, but after a ceremony, never touched alcohol again when they were getting in trouble with it. I saw this with one person I'm very close to, where he was working at becoming an alcoholic, and that stopped that process, absolutely. And my depression, anxiety lifted and never returned. And here's the theory: if it ain't broke, don't try and fix it. So we have to know when to keep our hands off, keep our mouths shut, to be more specific. Or when you have a numinous experience, and this is when therapists are really dangerous, is if we downgrade the numinous to psychological. And the therapist has to be able to discern the difference and to be able to recognize when this is a numinous experience that is not a spiritual bypass. And we can do terrible damage in this. So somebody has this incredible spiritual experience, and we can downgrade it to, a fantasy or wish fulfillment, or, there are a million horrible things we can say. And so you want to be careful who you tell your experiences to. It's not just therapists who can screw this up, but you just want to really protect your numinous experiences, not repeat them too much or too wide an audience. You want to be careful. But these are the times to seek psychotherapy. And a spiritual bypass, I love this, is a defense of premature transcendence. Or interpreting psychological issues as spiritual, or avoiding the shadow by going for the ecstatic experience, using higher doses to avoid psychological material, or to pursue thrill-seeking. And my best example of the interpreting psychological issues as spiritual is I was sitting with a young woman in a kind of a research interview that, for me, since I can't control myself, morphed into sort of a therapeutic intervention. And she was talking about a recent ayahuasca experience where she encountered the divine feminine, and how, and she was all of mid-20s, how this was life-changing and inspired her, what kind of woman she wanted to become, and was just this wonderful experience. And she's going on and on. 20 minutes I listened to this. And then I said to her, "How's your relationship with your mom?" And she burst into tears. I said, let's just do that work. I'm really big on the kindergarten, the very basic psychotherapy work. Do the work on your family of origin, the way you figured out how to survive that situation, and get that work done. And I don't know that this is linear, but don't skip it. That's what I'm saying. Shame and anger are particularly toxic emotions, difficult, and separate emotional self-regulation from depersonalization. That depersonalization where everything's kind of dead, people kind of feel, well, I'm calm, everything's dead, but I'm not reactive anymore. And that's not the same as self-regulation, being better able to manage difficult emotions. It's not the same. And you always want to know and ask yourself, how am I translating this new me in my personal relationships? And the other key thing is, we all have a self-critic. How compassionate can we be in our relationship with our own self-critic? Is it going to disappear ever? But how do we deal with it? So, if we have a self-critic and then we criticize ourselves for criticizing or for having such a harsh self-critic, you can see how we layer. And so compassion is what breaks that pattern. And therapy can help. The psychedelic experience can loosen it up, and therapy can help us practice greater compassion. So this is the other side of the died scale. And this is ego inflation, also something we want to be careful of. And if somebody's caught in this kind of ego inflation, they're not likely to call a therapist because they're having too good a time. But, that's when they need it. Rather than, building a temple somewhere on a river, they'd be better off in an office. And it's when you're just really carried away. And so it's interesting that Imperial College put these items together with ego dissolution. It's the opposite. And this is important for us as therapists. When there's a reliving of trauma in an ayahuasca, and I'm really speaking about ayahuasca, I'm not sure if this is true for all the psychedelics. Were you experiencing the trauma directly as if it were happening again in the here and now? So were you being actively re-traumatized in the ceremony? Or were you watching it unfold with distance? Again, you get this therapeutic distance, as if it were on a screen, or that you at least had some distance. So I remember a scene from my childhood where, I was watching my mother interact with me as a 3-year-old, and I had that distance, and I felt compassion for her and for the 3-year-old. And that's that therapeutic distance that allows the trauma to be metabolized and for us to move to a different place. I was not caught in being the 3-year-old again. That can be a re-traumatization. So there's a process of discernment for us as people in the ceremony, for us as therapists, for us as friends, listening to stories. And there's so much that requires discernment in this whole world because there's so much mystery and things that we can't nail down. There's so much mystery in this whole process. And so, we need to make good decisions, but discernment is a spiritual category of decision-making where you tune into yourself internally and to your highest self, and maybe to whatever help or guidance you find in the universe. And you check it out also with your cognitive thinking. You think it through rationally as well. But this is the best definition I've come up with. Listen to the message that leads to the love that permeates the universe. So, so much of what we experience in ceremonies, yes, we return as a new person. And then the next question is, what do we have to contribute? How do we not just share the love or the healing, but what are we called upon to contribute, to make a difference to our community? And it doesn't need to be something huge or big, but it's a question worth asking. And it's not something that you have to think up. It's something that you want to listen to be inspired. So what leads to the love that permeates the universe? So thank you. So I think we have a minute. We have 5 minutes for any questions, if anyone has any questions.
Thank you for being here. My name is Roberta Marcel Robles. I grew up on the Sayasla River on the Oregon coast. I got back from an ayahuasca journey in Ecuador, and the shamans told me to put the snake oil back under the ground. So I want you guys to all look around you and think about who's not here. And right now, who's not here are the children. So when you think about Portland, and you're in Revolution Hall, it's not just the revolution inside of you, it's the revolution for Mother Earth. And so I want you all to inspire and hear, what are you giving back to the community? And are you holding forth the youth voices? And so that's what I took away from my experience.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I'm really interested in Brene Brown's theory of vulnerability that fosters connection in interpersonal relationships. I'm wondering if you noticed any data from your studies if people came back more vulnerable and if that was able to change their attachment style.
That alone won't change. That's not, the attachment style changes through the processes that I delineated through marriage, therapy, and maybe a relationship with a spiritual other. But a secure attachment is more comfortable with being vulnerable because they feel more secure, and so it's safer to feel vulnerable. It's very hard, but someone could learn from who's in an anxious or avoidant attachment category to feel vulnerable, but it's extra hard.
Hello.
We're good?
In regards to knowing who Mama Aya is, have you considered asking her?
Help me out. Where are you?
Right over here.
Okay.
Again, in regards to the answer of who Mama Aya is, have you considered asking her?
You know who asked that question and got a fabulous answer is Connie Grouds. She's I don't know if you know that name. She was a pharmacist who went to Peru for continuing ed credits, and because she was getting out of a bad marriage, if she doesn't mind my saying so. And she was working in the garden of a shaman. It was the continuing ed thing where pharmacists were living with a shaman, and she cut her foot in the garden. And she saw the infection, and she said, I have to get out of here. I have to get to the city. And the shaman said, give me 24 hours. And he put a poultice on it, and the infection, diminished. And Connie at that point said, this shaman knows more than I know as a pharmacist, as a Western pharmacist. And so she studied 25 years with that shaman. And during that process and her own growing relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca, she asked directly, who are you? And the answer that came back was this, she talks about it in a ceremony, this huge energetic presence of Mother Nature. And, we are the wild forces of nature. She's got a beautiful way of presenting it. But that's the universal forces of nature, and that's basically the answer that she got. I don't think I could ask a better question or come up with a better answer. So thank you very much.